Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session today on the role of cloud technology in the financial sector. Please keep your swap card application handy and submit your questions in the box named live discussion. And also please vote in the poll with the question, what's the most important way to address reliance on US tech firms in financial services? Please also ignore the typo. A, EU IT companies can grow if we remove barriers in the single market of the EU. US oligopoly needs measures to bring about fair competition. C, Europe needs to improve innovation and the market will adjust. If you tweet, please use the hashtag PoliticoFS. Our guests today are Mr. Billy Kelleher, a member of the European Parliament from Ireland, Mr. Derek White, the Vice President for Global Financial Services at Google Cloud. And may I say, Derek, you have excellent woodwork behind you, if that is indeed woodwork. And Mr. Jan Seissan from the DG FISMA, the Financial Department of the European Commission, and he is the head of digital finance. I should like to start with a question about regulatory action. There is a debate at the moment around a regulatory package in the EU called DORA, and this is supposed to cover for potential risks emerging from the usage of cloud infrastructure by European financial institutions. And Jan, please, if you would start us off with a brief explainer of what DORA aims to achieve and what is the likely next step in this project. Thank you.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion. Actually, my background is less nice than that of Derek, but I hope on substance I can still convince. So indeed, the purpose of our proposals, which are called DORA, Digital Operational Resilience Act, is indeed to make sure that all firms in the financial sector actually have, let's say, systems in place to address digital operational resilience. Actually, finance is more and more digital. It's often exclusively digital. So this is really something where all parts of the financial system need to be shielded and need to have the systems in place. Otherwise, we're putting ourselves at risk. Otherwise, actually, digital finance may be perceived as being higher risk than normal finance, and that is not the objective nor the purpose. So what we've proposed are indeed common requirements for all financial institutions for risk management, applying in individual member states, applying across member states, applying across sectors, finance, insurance, banking. And we also have proposed actually particular rules on third party on which financial institutions are depending in their ICT management, and indeed an oversight framework for significant third-party providers. That's in a nutshell our proposals. As always in the EU, the Commission makes a proposal, but ultimately it is the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers who need to decide on that. So you have the privilege today to have the rapporteur here who will tell you more about this. The next steps are indeed now the negotiations in the European Parliament and in the Council on those proposals.
Thanks for that. That brings us quite neatly to Mr. Kelleher. Would you please explain why such a package is needed and where do you see the issues, the contentious parts of the debate as it goes into the further stages of legislation?
Well, I hope overall that it won't be too contentious. I mean, there is an acknowledgement, I think, around the broader communities in finance and in digital services and cloud computing, that there is a requirement to have in place robust systems that would ensure the integrity of financial services in the European Union. So from that perspective, I think there's overall agreement that we must do something to ensure there's resilience built into financial services. The next big question, of course, is how do we go about that? The objectives, the aims, and then how we implement those particular objectives and aims. DORA, Digital Operation Resilience Act, is the area that we are talking about that is going to clearly, challenge us in terms of bringing forward legislation that will do exactly what we want to do. I've been listening to the debates in conferences like this. I've been engaging with stakeholders for some time, and it depends on the perspective of people and the backgrounds. If you're in financial services, they're very much in favor of this, the requirements to ensure there's robust resilience built in. But then as you move towards the cloud providers, well then clearly there is concerns that there might be impediments put on them and obligations put on them that are overarching and overreaching and not necessary. So what we're trying to find is a balance and to bring proportionality into the debate to ensure that we, first of all, provide integrity in financial services, cybersecurity, and a robust systems of compliance and inspection, and that at the same time, we don't have a situation where we become completely reliant on critical third-party providers and having no ability to oversee or at least inspect or to have some reach in to them to ensure they're complying with the basic requirements to ensure that financial services has integrity and robustness built into a system. And if you look at the last 10 years, I mean, it has dramatically changed. If only a short number of years ago, banking institutions, finance institutions would have been spending vast sums of money on mainframe computers, their own in-house software systems, huge amounts of technical support required in-house. You now have a rapid move towards the cloud computing, cloud storage, cloud services, and that in itself, obviously is exciting from the point of view of giving financial services greater opportunities to develop new innovative creative ideas, embrace new technologies, but there is always that inherent risk of cybersecurity breakdown and attack. So as we become more dependent and interlinked between financial services and cloud services, well, then there's an obligation, I think, on the legislators and on those that, of public policy to bring forward this particular requirement, which is DORA. So I'm going to publish the report next week. That's the draft report. That will be published next week. And then we will have a period of about 6 to 8 weeks for amendments. And then we will go and hopefully the Econ Committee will ratify that report. And then we will go to discussions with the Council, the Parliament and the European Commission to finally bring about having a piece of legislation that will compel financial services to have robust systems in place, and also for the European Union to at least have a form of oversight in critical third-party providers to ensure that we don't become dependent on entities that actually are outside the European Union and that we have no reach into.
Thank you. Now, Derek, that does sound like a bunch of serious regulations are coming your way. So I wonder if you could tell us how you feel about that and whether you think it's going to make Google's life harder and what amendments, I'm sure you're engaged in this process. So what amendments or changes to the law are you suggesting?
Yeah, thank you. First off, it's great to be able to talk with you today. And I spent a good part of my career in Europe, working with financial institutions in Europe, and it's a privilege to just be able to talk with you today. After 25 years in financial services, I joined Google Cloud about 7 months ago, and the one thing is very clear is that Europe continues to lead the world in and is the heart of digital transformation and digital innovation. And we at Google Cloud and the cloud providers, we are embracing and fully support the regulation that is coming. I would pick 2 words. If I pick 2 words from the comments made previously by Jan and by Billy, and that is common and balance. The common element of being able to have common regulation as a hyperscaler cloud provider providing services all over the world, Europe as one of our key markets, being able to have common standards, common policy and regulation across individual states, across Europe, and then interconnectivity outside of Europe at a global scale is incredibly important. And then also recognizing the transformation that is happening now is happening at a very human level with customers, whether it's the end consumer or whether it's customers that are the treasurers of a large multinational corporation. Transformation at how people are interacting with technology and with money is changing dramatically. So there's a transformation at kind of the human level, at the business level, as well as the technology level. And it's our goal at Google and Google Cloud to embrace and enable business transformation and technology transformation at a market level and at our customer level so that they can better serve their customers. And we're engaging with regulators, having very open discussions, and we'll get into this a little bit more throughout this discussion, but very much support and are embracing and engaging with regulators on how to find that right commonality and balance.
Right. Just as a quick follow-up, Derek, in your engagement, could you give us an example of one item that you would like to change? You said you want to find the balance, so presumably there are some things that that you would like to see worked out differently in the law.
Yeah, so DORA has broad criteria where the criticality is not clearly defined. And we'd argue that the designation must be based on objective criteria and applied with materiality thresholds with oversight at an EU level, not just at an individual state or country level, but at a overall EU level would be one area. And if we look outside of the EU, for example, connectivity outside the EU into Asia Pacific and the UK. The UK's introduced risk-based practices that look at operational resilience, and failure is inevitable. And that's a step change in how authorities regulate firms, especially as it regards resilience. EU and Korea are creating direct oversight of and supervisory over critical technology and regulatory national financial services requirements. And we believe there's an opportunity for us to just connect across the UK, EU, and Asia Pacific to look at global connectivity, because businesses that operate just specifically within one country in Europe, European DORA regulations will apply, but many of the businesses that, especially financial services being trans-border in nature, will have connectivity outside of the EU, and we have to give consideration for that.
Thank you. Ian, how would you respond to that? How would you view this issue of connectivity and criticality across borders, especially across the outer borders of the EU, especially?
Yeah, actually, I would absolutely agree. And indeed, within the EU, indeed, I think we are the direction of travel we are looking at is exactly this one, to say, well, we have to look. If you're critical, you have to look at this from a European perspective, not just from a perspective of one member state. We're trying to have the same rules in place across the 27 member states. And internationally, actually, we are from our side working wherever possible in the international fora, whether that's the Financial Stability Board, whether that's the Basel Committee or others, actually on these issues of third-party tech providers. And I think very interested and engaged from our side to find as much as possible actually also common standards. I have to say that this work is still at a relatively early stage, and let's say not everybody is extremely keen to pursue it. But from our perspective, it is important to look at these things as much as possible globally and to converge the standards which exist and which are being developed actually.
Right. And presumably, since the EU is moving early here, there's an opportunity for the global standards to borrow quite a lot of the EU law. So there's an element of first mover advantage, I suppose.
Well, I mean, we are not yet there. So I think we have made a proposal.
That's the point.
I mean, it's true that often Europe is early in presenting proposals, and I think it's good because indeed we are transparent of what's on the table. But of course, this now needs to be implemented. I mean, I think we are really we are really interested to have the right standards in place across the globe. If our proposals can contribute to that, we're very happy about it. But indeed, there's still a bit of work to do before that in Europe.
Right. And back to Mr. Kelleher now, I would like to ask whether there's any notion that if the EU adopts this regulation and it does manage to have influence globally, does this have a good a positive effect on the EU technology market? Maybe it would stimulate some innovation in the EU that would contribute to less reliance on US giant Silicon Valley companies that provide the service today.
Yes, I mean, you would hope that if European regulation became the benchmark across the globe, well, I mean, it would be very welcome and we would be satisfied with that. I mean, but look, Singapore is at the cutting edge in this particular area, and so is the United States. So, I mean, we're not alone in terms of trying to develop resilience in the financial services and realizing that there's a huge dependence now on cloud computing and cloud services for financial services. But I think just to move slightly beyond that, I mean, if we are to talk about, resilience being built into the financial services, we have to accept in Europe as well that we are very much dependent on outside cloud providers. And that is a legacy, the fact that we haven't been, investing enough in innovation, creativity and technology at university level and right across the educational sphere. And we haven't been stimulating enough innovative creation, if you know what I mean. So from that perspective, all the big companies that we are dependent on are very much based in the United States. And the most recent times, it's now becoming coming from Asia. So we are lagging behind in terms of having cloud computing companies created in the European Union. And for that reason, we are exposed to a certain extent. But what I would be very concerned about would be that if we became overcomplicated in terms of our regulation, if we started to reach too far into cloud computing companies, and if we became too invasive in terms of regulation and oversight, that Europe could become a cold place for creativity and innovation. So we need to get that balance right. As was referred to earlier on, the two words commonality and balance. But we do need to have proportion very much at the heart of DORA to ensure that it does what it does and it doesn't stop creativity, innovation, and the financial services being able to find its place in the global world, and equally for cloud computing companies not to see Europe as a place that's cold to set up, to invest in, and to create in.
Understood. Yes. Well, that's an excellent point, Derek. I don't suppose Google is going to move to Europe anytime soon, but is Google looking at the technology environment in Europe in general, in the cloud business, and seeing any green shoots? And if not, what would your advice be for European policymakers to increase or to stimulate innovation in this part of the economy?
Yes, absolutely. We do. Google does have a notable presence in Europe, both in technology infrastructure, in customers that we're supporting, as well as employees that are based in and throughout Europe. The technical zones that power the resiliency of cloud capabilities are robust across Europe. So The technical infrastructure, we are a European company from that standpoint, in that we do provide capabilities within the EU to customers that are based in the EU. Many of you will have seen the announcement with Deutsche Bank and how we're supporting Deutsche Bank on a wholesale transformation that's looking at their technology, their business, and how they can best serve their customers. Because one of the most remarkable things that's happening in the world right now, and if you look at kind of the waves of innovation, we had the internet wave, we had the mobile wave that had end user impact. The cloud wave is now having, and will in the future have, an impact on not just technology, but on the end user. And so we as a company see a great future because of the conversations that we're having locally with customers, as well as with regulators and policymakers on the future of the financial services ecosystem, and how do we ensure the resiliency, the security, the stability, the operational resiliency for the financial services ecosystem, the financial players that operate within the ecosystem, and so that we can deliver the end services to customers today and in the future.
That does bring us to the question of the net benefit to the average client of the average bank from this regulation. Supposedly, the rules are going to ensure the bank doesn't lose access to its own IT system, or something even worse, unforeseen outages, stuff like that. So I wonder if you could, Ian, if you could explain a little bit the benefits and expected benefits anyway of this regulation on the citizens.
Well, I think there are many of them. I think there's the direct benefit. I mean, very concretely, today, if the ICT systems of a bank don't work anymore, you don't have access to your account, and that is, I think, by any standards, probably the biggest accident which you can have in finance, basically, also for citizens, for real life citizens. So, I mean, preventing that has a great benefit actually for citizens, and I think that is more a direct example. Then we go indirectly on that. I think we see a lot of advantages of digital finance. Actually, we've seen it in the COVID-19 situation, where this allowed people indeed to maintain access to their accounts, to continue being served, whether it's citizens or SMEs. But also going forward, there are a lot of innovative, actually very good services, whether that's helping people manage their personal finance, whether that's helping SME access to finance or others. And all those digital developments, of course, will only come if they are safe, and if people have the impression that they are not going into high risk territory if they go digital with their finance. In that sense, so the direct benefit is that what I have today as access, I can keep and I can maintain. And the indirect benefit is that this will actually, a solid and sound ICT environment will allow many of the promises of digital finance, which we can see in the future, and which again could be quite beneficial for many of our citizens and our businesses.
Thank you. So, Mr. Kelleher, the rules promise some degree of extra national foreign jurisdiction powers for the EU. So the rules would allow the EU to punish a foreign company if things go wrong. Would you explain that concept a little bit, and the global outreach and the effects of this, global effects of these regulations? Sorry.
Well, this is primarily, I presume you're referencing critical third-party providers. Look, there's only a certain number of cloud computing companies and cloud service companies that are providing to the large financial services market, we'll say, in the European Union. Obviously, you will have smaller entities as well. But I mean, where there's critical, reliance on a number of companies providing services, well, then there has to be some form of oversight or some form of obligation. Clearly, it can be done in two ways. It could be done directly, but I mean, if they're located outside of the European Union, well, that makes it significantly more challenging. It could be done in the service level agreements between the financial services and the critical third-party provider themselves, that there would be an obligation on financial services to do a due diligence on the company that they're contracting their services out to, and that they would then be obligated to ensure that the cloud computing company, the cloud vendor, would then have to live up to those obligations. Can you re-gend into a third-party provider? Well, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, most of the companies that we're talking about have spent huge sums of money. And when I'm talking about the cloud computing companies, have spent huge sums of money in ensuring that they have cyber integrity, that they are safe from cyber attack. One of the great concerns initially when financial services started moving to the cloud was around the issue of cyber security, and that in itself, meant that those companies that were trying to provide these services, that were marketing themselves to the financial services, had to invest huge sums in cyber safety. So, when you speak to cybersecurity experts, you could have geopolitical concerns. Countries like Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, for example, could have capabilities to potentially undermine. But the real risk comes from lots of small failures in the system that could magnify itself and then bring about a breakdown somewhere, or a risk in a certain financial service. Like up until a couple of years ago, we had cases across Europe where banks that were no longer able to support their own computer systems because of financial difficulties didn't invest, where their computer systems crashed, where people couldn't access their accounts, couldn't access money for weeks on end. So, I mean, we've had difficulties in terms of financial services previously, but that was always within-house, their own technology failing, their own computer systems crashing because they weren't spending enough and upgrading them enough and providing that investment. So they've moved now to cloud computing. I believe that that's a very exciting move, and I think it's something that's going to create a huge dynamic both for financial services, for cloud computing, but most importantly, for consumers. And what financial services and digital and the move to digital economy has shown us is that with creativity comes wonderful innovation and great changes to society and how we live and how we operate. Remote working, access to your personal finances in your phone right across the board, pay as you go, the wallet in Apple, for example. There is a myriad of examples that have just made life so much easier for citizens and for people interacting with financial services. And that is going to continue at a pace. So back to the original point, we want to ensure that we don't put any obstacles to creation and innovation in the financial services sector, that they can continually look beyond the horizon, not afraid that regulation will stay stuck in time and won't be future-proofed. And that's another key area that we're looking at, is to ensure that DORA is future-proofed, that we don't have a situation whereby the regulation effectively holds back creativity and innovation. So I'd like to see a review clause and things like that in it that would make it acceptable to everybody, knowing that if there was any glitches that were identified, that they could be resolved because of the ability to future-proof it through the review.
Right.
Can I just chime in there, if that's okay? Because Billy, that is just music to my ears and to I think the ecosystem to hear the way you have articulated that, because we have conversations every day with institutions that are struggling to keep up with their technology investments and to keep whether it's their mainframe systems, their data centers, their underlying infrastructure and capabilities, to keep up the resilience of those and invest in systems that may be dated. And yet, as a hyperscaler technology company with technology that is invested in and is tested at scale with billions of users on a regular basis, notable investment goes into ensuring that technology meets the level of security and cyber requirements at a financial security level. and the way you articulated, ensuring that that the regulation does not establish obstacles to creativity and innovation and furthering business is fantastic, while ensuring that we're designing the right environments for stability and security that will ultimately deliver for our end customers.
Right.
Well, I hope I can live up to your expectations.
Well, that does sound like you're broadly in agreement, but there is still the outstanding question of whether the unforeseen happens, the cloud dissipates, so to speak, and then a lot of people are unable to access their money. Worst case scenario. What are the levers, the teeth that policymakers have to ensure things are brought back to normal quickly? Ian.
Well, I think that's I think the whole discussion around DORA, and I think we have put together a couple of levers here, and there are of course other ones outside. But if you look particularly at the access to deposits, for example, or more immediately, indeed, ICT issues related to banks and credit institutions or financial institutions. The first issue, let's say traditional. Let's start like this. Traditionally, people have looked at capital on the banking side, basically. Well, the more risk you have, the more capital you need. I think it's pretty clear that this doesn't really work for these operational risk issues because indeed you need to prevent rather than heal. And second, many of them are very small probability risks, but when they come, indeed, there can be very high impact. So that doesn't really work. So that's why indeed we've moved, and that's the whole approach of digital operational resilience. Actually, we've moved to an approach where indeed we ask firms actually to plan, to manage the risks actually proactively, to indeed have the risk management systems in place, but also in a broader context of resilience, thinking indeed all elements of this of the cycle together. That's where indeed we have suggested for firms indeed to have clear requirements to report incidents, indeed also to the supervisors. And the supervisors are the next level we have. They are clearly getting more and more up to speed on ICT matters, and they do need to do that in the future, doing financial supervision without being able also to analyze in detail how indeed ICT systems work, what other risks will no longer be possible. So that's the supervisory part. Then I think a third lever indeed is testing. Actually, we need to make sure that at least for the more advanced institutions, the systems are also being tested. Actually, including through real life tests, through external tests, threat-led penetration testing, particularly against cyber attacks. And indeed, the last element are indeed then the interaction with third-party providers, where we think we need to look at this both from the perspective of the financial institution. There need to be clear, let's say, risk analysis in place. There need to be clear contracts in place, also clear possibilities for exit strategies, approaches also looking at multiple vendors. And then on the other hand, from the supervisor perspective, again, to have indeed the direct access to information when it comes to critical third-party providers. And that's where then indeed the oversight of third-party providers comes into place. So I think those are in a way multiple levers, multiple instruments. I think all of them are based indeed on international work being carried out on those matters, and in that sense, very much also reflecting, I think, the thinking of the international community on those matters. And I think if we can implement them, and we're working together with the European Parliament and even the Council on this, I think we are in a relatively good spot in Europe when it comes to the framework. Of course, those powers and those levers need to be used, and that's why indeed this skill on the side of supervisors and actually their practical expertise on this is, I think, also very, very important point to be highlighted and stressed.
Right. Well, thanks for that. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. As a concluding thought, I would like to share with you the results of our little poll that we discussed earlier. We had 13 votes, and 69% of the respondents actually think the European Union needs to improve innovation, and then the market will simply adjust. So work on the basics, stimulate the research and development, and all will be well according to our audience anyway. Stay tuned for the next session with Bjarke Smith-Meyer, my colleague in Brussels, who will interview Mr. Gentiloni. And thanks very much for joining us. All the best.